Few villains in Batman's rogues gallery have undergone as dramatic a transformation as Poison Ivy. In her first 25 years of existence, she was little more than a one-note plant-themed criminal. Attractive, dangerous, but largely forgettable. Then came Batman the Animated Series in 1992 and the episode Pretty Poison, where the character was truly refined by being given a purpose. Ivy was no longer defined by a gimmick, but a conviction. She was reimagined as a defender of the natural world, willing to commit terrible acts in the name of something she genuinely believed in. This wasn't the first time that the BTAS writers took a minor Batman villain and reshaped them into a complex figure. The most well-known example of this is Mr. Freeze in the seminal episode Heart of Ice. But they did the same thing with Two-Face, Clayface and the Mad Hatter, to name but a few. And I think that Pretty Poison shouldn't be slept on. This episode was the first step towards transforming Poison Ivy into a villain with intelligence, ambition, and a moral vision that, while deadly, made her stand out in Batman's rogues gallery. It also made her a parallel to Batman, who was on his own crusade of justice. The episode is about how Pamela Isley seduces District Attorney Harvey Dent and poisons him for a perceived slight that he is completely unaware of. And what's really important to note is that this isn't an origin episode. Hell, Poison Ivy doesn't even get a formal origin in this show. She just is. In the comics, Pamela Isley had been the assistant of either a ruthless thief or a psychotic botanist, depending on the time period, that was left for dead, which led to her becoming Poison Ivy. Victimhood was at the core of her character. But here she is instead portrayed as a talented scientist, an eco-warrior, and a woman acting on her own motives. Her anger is rooted in her deep connection to plants and outrage at environmental destruction. And, most importantly, she is not a victim. She seeks vengeance for those she sees as victims. The plants. And at the same time, while Dent's poisoning drives the plot, this episode subtly does a lot to establish his character before he becomes Two-Face. He is jovial, charming, but his quickness to fall in love highlights his own psychological fragility and teases his eventual fate, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But as someone that unashamedly loves Two-Face, I enjoy these early building blocks. And speaking of origins, to help demonstrate just how transformative Pretty Poison was, let's just quickly check in on Ivy's comic book counterpart. I did a whole video about how BTAS defined Poison Ivy several years ago, which I've linked to in the info button, so add that to your watch later list if you want to hear more. Poison Ivy was created in 1966 at the height of Batmania driven by the Adam West starring TV series. Her creators rather cynically came up with her with the intention of bringing her to the screen, but the hype bubble around the series burst before that could happen. Ultimately, she was a generic seductive villain with a plant theme and weapons based around femininity, like her makeup mirror and explosive hair strands. Yeah, I know. Her first origin was told about a decade later, how as a young student she had been seduced by her professor and manipulated into stealing a rare root, which he then used to poison her. Later she was reimagined as a student of the interdimensional plant man Jason Woodrue, who experimented on her. She had stints in the secret society of supervillains and the Suicide Squad, but all in all, she was pretty forgettable. Now, when Batman the Animated Series' creative team got their hands on her, they were determined to shine the spotlight on lesser-known Batman villains. This is why their first episode featured Man-Bat instead of someone more recognizable, like the Joker or the Penguin. For as much as people give Bruce Timm crap about the way he draws women, I'd argue that it is important to him to have strong female characters with personality who aren't just eye candy. It's also worth noting that Ivy was designed by Lynn Naylor, not Bruce Timm. In this episode, she is introduced as Harvey Dent's new girlfriend and soon-to-be fiancée. She is a botanist that works for a fragrance company and is the designer of some hit scents. But in secret, she spends her evenings prancing around her massive greenhouse, plotting Dent's downfall. As the episode begins, we're shown one of Dent's early election campaign promises, to reduce crime in Gotham by building a new prison funded by Bruce Wayne. Oh, look at that, another way Batman uses money for the betterment of Gotham. The irony is that the construction of Stonegate Penitentiary is presented as key towards making a better, safer Gotham, but really it doesn't seem to make any difference. There is some subtle social commentary there about how incarceration isn't necessarily the most appropriate punishment for some criminals because it doesn't actually address the root causes of crime, pun intended. Simply locking people away isn't a cure for social problems, and that the structures built to protect society can have unintended consequences. For Pamela Isley, the destruction of the wild roses for the prison's construction is proof of that disconnect. The supposed path to safety comes at the expense of nature itself, and she views that as murder. With that in mind, let's take a moment to analyse Dent's campaign promise. A better, safer Gotham. The words better and safer are subjective concepts, often defined by those in power. Dent and Wayne may see the penitentiary as progress, but Ivy sees the cost, extinction, devastation, and the prioritisation of human systems over the living world. Gotham's justice system, like many real-world attempts at reform, can be blind to collateral damage, and the consequences of that blindness fuel her first act of revenge. In the present day, we're shown a prisoner escaping from Stonegate, which literally demonstrates how ineffective it is. Seems like all they need is a friend with a helicopter and to be able to run pretty fast. Now, by framing the prison this way, Pretty Poison raises a broader question. What does it truly mean to make Gotham better and safer? The episode suggests that justice without nuance can be as destructive as crime itself, and that those who claim to protect the city may, in their own way, be sowing the seeds of the next threat. Ivy is the first to exploit that irony, using her knowledge and ingenuity to strike at the public face of this initiative. In this episode, Dent is representative of the establishment and how communities can be displaced in the name of progress. It's just that, in this case, it's the wild thorny rose that suffers. And despite the fact that she breeds extremely dangerous plants, this is a more grounded version of Poison Ivy. She doesn't use pheromones or mind control at this point in time. Instead, she uses her own natural beauty and Dent's lust to ensnare him. She doesn't need powers to achieve her goals. She uses her body and her mind in pure pulpy femme fatale fashion. And to get back to Dent, I've touched upon the idea of how his quickness to form romantic attachments hints at his own fragile mental state. Again, linked to in the info button, so add that to your watch later list. But it's one of those things that I really enjoy about this episode, even though I am certain that it wasn't an intentional hint at his mental health problems. Later episodes reveal that Dent had been struggling with dissociative identity disorder as a result of buried childhood trauma, itself a radical departure from the comic book source material. And Dent shows signs of attachment anxiety. He appears to have a deep fear of being alone, using intimacy as a way to soothe his own emotional turmoil. In Pretty Poison, his rapid engagement to Pamela Isley after knowing her for only a week is a reflection of his own psychological need for stability and connection. Dent seeks certainty in a chaotic world, and for someone so emotionally volatile, the idea of committing to another person can feel like an anchor, a way to define himself and gain a sense of security. This context not only makes his susceptibility to Ivy's scheme more believable, it underscores a recurring theme in this series. Even those who fight for justice are not immune to their own vulnerabilities. In an ironic form of punishment, Ivy distills a lethal poison from the last remaining thorny rose and puts it into her lipstick. She damns Dent with a passionate kiss, created from the victims of his crime, as she puts it. In this way, Ivy's kiss of death is as much about narrative elegance as it is about pulp tradition. She could have killed Dent with a gun, rat poison, or some other straightforward method, but instead she chooses to get close, to engage with him emotionally, and to enact a personal, almost poetic justice. In those pulp tales, the beautiful enigmatic woman is both alluring and deadly, often leading men to their downfall through seduction rather than brute force. Poison Ivy in Pretty Poison embodies this archetype perfectly. She uses charm, intimacy, and apparent vulnerability to manipulate Dent, turning affection into a tool for vengeance. Of course, the femme fatale is a character born from a very male-centric genre, and the trope carries with it traces of misogyny, with women reduced to their sexuality, framed as dangerously manipulative. But in Ivy's case, the show isn't mocking or condemning her for being a woman. Rather, it's using the trope as shorthand to tell a story of revenge and moral irony. Ivy isn't defined by her gender, and her deadly kiss isn't about male fear of female sexuality, although that man-eating plant is very Freudian. It's about the consequences of perceived corruption, the lives destroyed by those in power, and her cruel response to that. And one of my favourite things about the episode is that it follows a pattern of the villain who is wronged by the powerful. See also Mr. Freeze, the Riddler, Clayface, and so many others. But in this case, she's avenging plants. And it's Ivy's devotion to plants that ultimately leads to her downfall. When she has Batman dead to rights, he plays on her mania by holding the last thorny rose hostage. If she kills him, he will take the plant with him. Of course, she relents. Dent is cured, and Ivy is locked away in the depths of Stonegate, the prison whose construction started this whole scheme. As the episode ends, what's striking is Ivy's blend of intellect, ambition, and moral extremity. She is dangerous, yes, but she is also compelling in a way that the character had never been before. I'd say that Pretty Poison stands out because it blends style, substance, and character in equal measure. It introduces Poison Ivy as more than a plant-themed gimmick, giving her agency, intellect, and a distinct moral vision. She's a villain who acts according to her own logic. Twisted logic, sure, but logic nonetheless. Every move she makes is purposeful and every choice shaped by her values, even when those values put her in conflict with the people around her. At the same time, the episode isn't afraid to show the vulnerabilities of those who represent Gotham's institutions. Harvey Dent may be the target of Ivy's scheme, but he is also a person whose own fragility and desire for stability make him human and sympathetic. The contrast between Ivy's cunning and Dent's susceptibility allows the story to explore consequences, justice, and retribution in a way that feels smart and morally interesting. Pretty Poison is proof that an episode doesn't need to reveal a character's origin to make them compelling. Ivy's mix of elegance, danger, and warped ideology makes her unforgettable, while also reflecting the series' broader ethos. Their world is defined by moral complexity, where good intentions and dangerous obsessions often collide. In the end, Pretty Poison is a showcase of what Batman the Animated Series does best. Reimagine familiar characters, layer them with nuance, and tell a story that entertains, provokes thought, and lingers long after the credits roll. It's an episode that reminds us why Gotham's villains, in all their brilliance and menace, are worth paying attention to. Okay, that's it for this essay. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really liked the video and feel like tossing a buck or two my way, please consider using the thanks button, because every little helps. And if you have really enjoyed my work, you might want to pick up a copy of my book, Rogues Gallery. It features 22 essays on villains from Batman the Animated Series. There's a beautiful cover by Batman the Animated Series background artist John Calmette, a foreword by director Dan Reber, and a moving segment from the late Kevin Conroy sharing his thoughts on life, love, and loss. Plus, an exclusive essay on the Condiment King that will never be made into a video. Rogues Gallery is available worldwide on Amazon, both digitally and in softcover. Finally, channel memberships are just $1.99 a month and give you early access to my essays, custom emojis, and your name featured on my members end screen, which has been rolling for a little while now. Huge thanks to everyone who's already part of this. You've helped to make these videos possible. If you want to see your name up here too, join the channel now. And while I have your attention, please consider checking out my other channel, Serum Lake Comics, where I talk about mostly DC comic books. Next time. On Monday, well, it's been a while since I talked about Batman Caped Crusader, and ahead of the second season coming out later this year, God willing, I want to talk about the episode And Be a Villain, and why I think it is exceptional. And next Friday, we're going back to the results of my Justice League Villains poll to talk about the earth-shattering beast that never quite was. Yeah, we're talking about Doomsday. Hope to see you then.